The morning Alberta Blackwell walked out of the land office in Redemption Creek, with the deed pressed against her chest like a shield, a stranger on a gray horse came riding down the main street, and something in the way the dust rose around his boots made her stop walking entirely. She had not stopped moving in 3 years. Not when her father died and left her nothing but a letter pointing to a stretch of land in the Cimarron Valley. Not when the bank in Wichita told her a woman alone had no business filing a homestead claim. Not when 2 consecutive winters stripped the topsoil raw and left her with cracked hands and a stubbornness that bordered on a medical condition. She had not stopped moving, and she did not stop for men. And yet there she stood on the wooden sidewalk outside Harlan Pruitt's land office on the 23rd of April in the year 1878, watching a man she had never seen before slow his horse to a walk and look around Redemption Creek like he was trying to decide whether the town was worth the trouble. She decided immediately that he was not worth watching, tucked the deed more firmly under her arm, and walked straight to the general store to buy flour, salt, and the wire nails she needed for the east fence. His name was Isaac Fletcher, though Alberta did not know that yet. He was 31 years old, tall in the saddle in the unhurried way of a man who had ridden too many miles to waste energy on posture, with dark eyes that moved carefully over everything they touched. He had come from Dodge City by way of a disagreement with a cattle broker named Stiles who had shorted him on 3 months of trail wages, and before that from a ranch outside Amarillo that no longer existed, and before that from a childhood in Tennessee that he did not talk about. He carried a Colt on his hip because every man in the territory carried a Colt on his hip, and a rifle in the saddle boot, and a pair of saddlebags that held a change of clothes, a dog-eared copy of a surveying manual, and $17.40 in actual currency. He had not come to Redemption Creek for any particular reason, which was precisely the kind of reason that had been guiding him for 3 years. He had simply turned south at the fork outside of Liberal because south looked less like more of the same, and Redemption Creek was the first town he had hit before the Cimarron Valley opened up wide and golden ahead of him. He tied his horse at the rail outside the Broken Spoke Saloon, not because he intended to drink at 9 in the morning, but because the saloon usually had the most current information about the surrounding country. The barkeep, a heavy-set man named Digger Walsh who had not been a digger of anything in 20 years, was sweeping the floor with the resigned expression of a man sweeping it for the last time. Passing through or stopping? Digger asked without looking up. Depends on what there is to stop for, Isaac said. Not much. Land if you want it. Harlan Pruitt runs the land office across the street. Most of the good valley parcels are gone, but there are a few up toward the ridge that might suit a man. I'm not looking for land, Isaac said, though he did not know why he said it with such certainty, because he had in fact been thinking about land for the better part of 6 months. Then you are in the wrong town, Digger said amiably. Redemption Creek does not have much else. Isaac bought a coffee because it was there and sat at a table near the window and looked at the street. It was then that he saw her again. Alberta Blackwell coming out of the general store with a sack of flour balanced on one shoulder and a length of wire bundled under her other arm and a look on her face that said she had done this 100 times and would do it 100 more, and anyone who thought it looked difficult was welcome to try. She was about 28, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back tightly and a practical cotton dress under a canvas work coat that had seen considerable use. She loaded everything into the back of a small wagon with the efficiency of someone who had learned early that strength was a resource to be managed, not displayed. He watched her check the wheel on the wagon's right rear axle, which had a slight wobble he could see even from across the street. She noticed it too, bent to examine it, straightened with a small expression of controlled frustration, and then climbed up to the seat and clicked her tongue at the horse as if the wheel had simply agreed to cooperate through force of her will. He thought nothing more of it. That was what he told himself as he finished his coffee. But when her wagon wheel finally gave up the argument with her entirely and cracked clean off about a quarter-mile south of town on the wagon road leading to the Cimarron Valley. And when he happened to be riding out of Redemption Creek at that exact moment, heading in no particular direction, he did not have a reasonable way to ride past a wagon sitting, tilted in a rut with its wheel in pieces, and a woman standing beside it with her hands on her hips looking like she was considering whether to be angry at the wheel or at the entire concept of wheels. He pulled up his horse a few yards away. She looked at him with the measured assessment of someone who had learned that strangers on roads were not automatically helpful. "Axle or hub?" he asked. She blinked once, surprised that his first question was useful rather than pitying. "Hub cracked. The wood was already dry. I knew it." "You have spare wood in the wagon." "I have a spare spoke and an iron band that is the wrong size, which will tell you exactly what kind of morning I have been having." He dismounted without being asked, and tied his horse to the wagon bed and crouched to look at the wheel. The hub had split along an old crack, probably from the frozen ground thawing and swelling the wood over the winter. The spoke she had was not the right size either. He turned the broken pieces in his hands with the attention of a man who had fixed enough things in the field to know what was fixable and what required a different approach. "If we can get the wagon back to town, the smithy can turn a new hub by this afternoon," he said. "I know that," she said. "I also know that this wagon is not moving anywhere with 3 wheels. 2 strong people can lift the axle end while it rolls on the other 3 wheels if the load is lightened. We unload part of the cargo, walk it back, get the hub replaced." She looked at him again with that careful measuring gaze. He could see her deciding whether to trust the practical logic of what he was saying independently of whether she trusted him. "You are offering to help," she said. It was not quite a question. "I am offering to help you get the wagon back to town, yes. What do you want for it?" He stood up, dusting his hands on his trousers, and there was something almost amused in his face, though he kept it contained. "Nothing. My horse needed the rest anyway." She considered this for what seemed like a full minute. Then she said, "The flour is the heaviest. We can carry it between us." "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Alberta Blackwell," she said, as if establishing the terms of a business arrangement. "I have a homestead claim 4 miles south of here in the Cimarron Valley, and I do not need saving, only assistance." "Isaac Fletcher," he said, "and there is a difference between the two, I have found." She almost smiled. She caught herself doing it and looked away. "Then let us get the flour." They worked together for the next 2 hours with the quiet efficiency of people who understood labor and did not need to fill it with talk. Isaac took the weight of the axle end, and Alberta drove the horse forward in short, controlled pulls while he lifted and walked. And somehow between the two of them, they managed to work the 3-wheeled wagon back into Redemption Creek without losing any more of the cargo. At the smithy, a broad-shouldered Swede named Anders Lindqvist looked at the hub, agreed it was repairable, and said it would be ready by mid-afternoon. Alberta sat on a barrel outside the smithy and ate a biscuit she produced from her coat pocket, with the practicality of someone who had learned not to assume meals would be available at normal times. She looked at Isaac standing with his horse, and something in the set of her expression shifted, just slightly, toward something that was not quite calculation anymore. "Are you headed somewhere specific?" she asked. "Not especially," he said honestly. "That is an unusual answer for a man in this territory. Most men have somewhere to be or are running from somewhere they were." "I have been working cattle drives out of Dodge for 3 seasons," he said. "The work dried up after the winter markets fell. I thought I might find something different." "Different how?" He looked out toward the valley where it spread south and gold-green in the spring morning light. "Something that stays put," he said, and he was surprised to hear himself say it, because he had not articulated it that clearly before, even to himself. Alberta looked at the valley too. She had the deed in her coat pocket now, the paper worn soft at the folds from being checked and rechecked over 3 years of uncertainty. She had filed the last document at 7 o'clock this morning. The land was hers, properly and completely hers, under the Homestead Act. 160 acres of valley floor and ridge and creek-fed meadow that had cost her everything she had, and 3 years she would not trade for anything. Redemption Creek is not a bad town, she said carefully. Anders Lindqvist does good work. The Prout family runs the land office honestly enough. Harlan's son Wade is a problem, but he stays mostly to himself. Isaac looked at her sidelong. She was not recommending the town to him exactly. She was giving him information and allowing him to draw his own conclusions. He found that interesting. What kind of problem? He asked. The kind that resents women who own land, she said simply. He filed a competing claim on my parcel 2 years ago, and Harlan overruled it, and Wade has not forgiven anyone involved, including you, especially me. She said it matter-of-factly, without drama or self-pity, and Isaac thought that was probably the most telling thing he had learned about Alberta Blackwell in 2 hours of knowing her. She had been threatened and opposed and had kept her eyes forward. The wheel was ready at 3 in the afternoon. Isaac paid for half of it before Alberta could stop him, which produced the first real flash of annoyance he had seen from her. "I did not ask you to do that," she said, her voice careful but with an edge to it. "You did not ask me to help with the wheel in the first place either," he said. "I seem to make decisions independently sometimes. I pay my own debts, Mr. Fletcher." "It was not a debt, Miss Blackwell. It was a kindness." She stared at him for a moment as if kindness was a category of things she was not sure how to file properly. Then she climbed up to the wagon seat and gathered the reins and said, without looking at him, "I have coffee at the homestead. If you are riding south anyway, you are welcome to stop." He rode south. The Cimarron Valley in late April of 1878 was the kind of country that made a person understand why people walked 2,000 miles to find it. The river ran clear and cold off the western ridge, lined with cottonwoods just coming into leaf, their young green so bright it almost hurt to look at. The valley floor was wide and grass-covered with the good mixed-grass prairie that meant deep topsoil, and the hills on either side were red sandstone and cedar, warm-colored against the sky. Alberta's claim ran from the creek on the west to the ridge road on the east, and the homestead house sat in the middle of it, a small but solid structure of adobe brick and timber that she had largely built herself with help from a neighbor woman named Cecilia Reyes, whose husband ran cattle on the adjacent parcel. Isaac looked at the house and the land with the eyes of a man who had been looking at country for a long time and recognized the difference between land that was merely present and land that was cared for. Someone had put work into this place. The garden was turned and planted on the south side of the house. The fence lines were clean and maintained. A small barn held a milk cow and 2 horses and had a recently repaired roof. "You built most of this yourself," he said. It was not a question. "Cecilia and Marcos Reyes helped with the roof," Alberta said. "And the adobe was a community effort the first summer, but yes, most of it." She made coffee on the cast-iron stove and they sat at the table by the window that faced the creek, and it was a strange, quiet thing, sitting in someone's kitchen after knowing them for only a day. But it did not feel strange to either of them, and that itself was something to think about. "What did you do before this?" she asked. "Before the cattle drives, I worked as a surveyor's assistant for a land company out of Kansas City," he said. "Before that, the war." She understood that the war was a door he was indicating without opening, and she did not press it. She had lost her father to the years after the war more than the war itself, the way it had hollowed him out and sent him west looking for something he could not name. She had a rough understanding of that particular kind of damage. "You know surveying," she said thoughtfully. "I know it well enough. The surveyor I worked with, a man named Caleb Hurst, was thorough. I learned from watching him. I ask because I have a boundary dispute developing on my eastern line," she said. "Wade Prout has been moving fence posts, slowly, enough that it might be argued as error, but 3 fence posts in 2 months is not error." Isaac set his coffee cup down. "How much land are we talking about?" "Perhaps 8 acres, maybe 10. It includes the best water access on the east side, from a spring that runs even in August. That is the point of it." Isaac thought about this. He thought about a man who moved fence posts slowly enough to claim error and a woman who had spent 3 years building something real and did not have the resources to fight a prolonged legal boundary dispute. "I could survey the line," he said, "properly, with documentation. If you have the original plat from the land office, I can establish the corners and mark them in a way that would hold up in front of a judge." She looked at him steadily. "Why would you do that?" The question was direct and fair, and he took it seriously, which she noticed. "Because it is a problem I know how to solve," he said, "and because moving fence posts on a woman who just spent 3 years earning her land is the kind of thing that bothers me considerably." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was necessary and then nodded once, the way she nodded when something had been decided. "I would pay you for it," she said. "We can talk about that after," he said. He did not leave that evening. Not because he was invited to stay, exactly, but because the survey work would need to start the following morning to use the best light, and riding 4 miles back to Redemption Creek to sleep at the boarding house, and 4 miles back before dawn, was wasteful when the barn had a perfectly good empty stall. Alberta offered it practically, and he accepted practically, and they both understood that the practicality was genuine, and also that it was a kind of trust being extended. He lay in the hayloft that night listening to the creek and the horses breathing below and the enormous quiet of the valley, which was a completely different kind of quiet from the trail or the bunkhouse, and thought about what she had said. Something that stays put. He had said it first, but she had recognized it. He could not remember the last time anyone had recognized something he said. The survey took 2 days. Isaac worked methodically, using the original plat and his own careful compass readings, driving iron stakes at the proper corners and marking them with paint, and keeping a written record of every measurement in a notebook that he wrote in a precise engineer's hand. Alberta walked the lines with him, asking intelligent questions and learning the process as they went with the focused attention of someone adding to a working knowledge base. She did not ask unnecessary questions, and she did not fill silence with chatter, and Isaac found, somewhat to his own surprise, that 2 days of working alongside her in the open field felt entirely natural. On the second afternoon, they found the third moved post. It had been shifted 11 feet into Alberta's claim. The original location was still visible as a faint depression in the ground, and Isaac measured it 3 times from 2 different reference points to make sure, and then wrote it in the notebook in careful detail. Alberta stood over the displaced post and looked at it with a quietness that Isaac had come to understand was not passivity, but a form of controlled anger she kept on a tight rein. "That is enough to take to the county sheriff," he said. "Sheriff Beaumont is Harlan Pruitt's brother-in-law," she said. Isaac was quiet for a moment. "Then we document everything here. We have the survey witnessed by a third party, and we take it to the circuit judge when he comes through." "When is the next circuit?" "August," she said. "Then we build a documentation case between now and August that cannot be disputed," he said. "You have the deed, the original plat, and now a professional survey with witnesses. Wade Pruitt moved a fence post 11 feet, not 111 feet, and a judge is going to see a frightened, small-minded man trying to bully a woman out of a water source she legally owns." She turned from the post and looked at him, and what he saw in her face then was not gratitude exactly, which is what he might have expected. It was something closer to relief. The relief of someone who had been carrying a weight alone for a long time and had suddenly found, unexpectedly, that someone was standing next to them and intended to stay standing there. "You have a quality about you," she said, "of someone who solves problems without requiring that I be grateful for the solving." "I do not want your gratitude," he said. "What do you want?" It was the same question she had asked him on the road, but it meant something entirely different now. He felt it shift between them like weather. He kept his voice steady. "Right now, I would like to finish driving this stake back where it belongs and get back before the light goes," he said. She nodded. But she was almost smiling again, and this time she did not catch herself. Cecilia Reyes came the following morning to serve as a witness to the survey findings, as Isaac had asked. Cecilia was 34 years old, compact and practical, with the kind of friendship with Alberta that had been built on shared labor and genuine respect. She looked at Isaac Fletcher over her coffee cup with the clear-eyed assessment of a woman who had already formed opinions about men on Alberta's behalf and would revise them only under significant evidence. "Alberta tells me you are a surveyor," Cecilia said. "Among other things," Isaac said. "What other things?" "Cecilia," Alberta said. "I am simply asking," Cecilia said with perfect innocence. Isaac answered honestly, as he generally did. "Trail work mostly, some carpentry, a little land law. I can rope and I can ride, and I know which plants you can eat if you are lost in the territory, and which ones will make you wish you had been lost somewhere else." Cecilia looked at Alberta. Alberta looked at the window. Cecilia looked back at Isaac with the expression of someone whose opinion had just shifted substantially. Cecilia signed the survey documentation with a clean, clear signature, and stayed for a noon meal that Alberta made with eggs from her own chickens and cornbread from the flour she had bought in Redemption Creek. And the three of them sat at the small table in the adobe kitchen, and it felt like something that had been happening for years rather than something new and tentative. After Cecilia left, Alberta washed the dishes and Isaac dried them, which was not something either of them had explicitly arranged but happened naturally. And in the middle of it, Alberta said without looking at him, "I need to hire a hand for the spring work. I have been managing alone, but the east field needs breaking and I cannot drive a team and follow a plow at the same time without losing a full week in the process." "I know how to break ground," Isaac said. "I know you do," she said. "I am telling you that there is work here if you want it. Paid work. I cannot pay much, but there is the barn and meals." He dried the last plate and set it on the shelf and thought about the road north toward Dodge City and the road south toward nowhere in particular, and the plowed red earth outside the window of this small adobe house in the Cimarron Valley. "I will stay through the spring and summer," he said. "Through the circuit judge." "And after that?" she asked. "After that we will see." She nodded and handed him a bucket. "Then start with the east field tomorrow. The soil needs water first, the creek is low on the south bank, and the irrigation channel needs clearing." He took the bucket. He was almost certain she was hiding a smile, and the certainty of it did something entirely unexpected to his chest. The spring work was the hardest and best kind of work, the kind that transformed a piece of country incrementally and visibly, so that every evening you could look back at what the morning had been and see the change. Isaac cleared the irrigation channel and broke the east field and repaired the barn door and rebuilt the chicken coop roof and fixed 3 sections of fence and checked every fence post on the eastern boundary with the methodical attention of a man who was building a legal record as much as a physical one. He found 2 more displaced posts and documented each one. Alberta planted the east field with winter wheat, and the south garden with corn, beans, and squash in the old companion planting arrangement. She had learned from a Pueblo woman named Delia, who had worked briefly at the trading post in Redemption Creek the previous year. Delia had taught her things about this valley's soil and water and growing seasons that no farming manual had included, and Alberta had learned them with the same focused attention she brought to everything she decided was worth knowing. They fell into a rhythm that was companionable and unspoken, the particular rhythm of 2 self-sufficient people who had discovered that working alongside another self-sufficient person was not a diminishment of independence, but an amplification of capacity. Isaac did not tell her what to do with her land, and she did not ask him to do things her way. And when they disagreed, which they did occasionally, they argued it out with the honesty of people who respected each other's reasoning even when they did not share it. One evening in the middle of May, they were sitting on the front step of the house after supper, watching the last light go gold on the ridge, and Isaac said out of nowhere, "I used to think I did not want land because I had seen what wanting things too much did to people." Alberta looked at the ridge too. "What did it do?" "Made them narrow," he said. "My father owned a farm in Tennessee." He was so afraid of losing it that he never actually lived on it. He just guarded it. And you learned the wrong lesson from that, she said quietly. He looked at her sideways. What do you mean? You learned not to want anything at all when the lesson was not to let fear of losing something stop you from enjoying it. He was quiet for a long moment. The creek made its steady sound in the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the hills a coyote called once and went quiet. You are a perceptive woman, Alberta Blackwell, he said. I have had considerable time alone to think, she said. It has its uses. He looked at her in the last of the light, the way the gold caught in her dark hair, and the way she sat with the easy comfort of someone who had earned her place on this step in this valley. And he felt something in him that he had been careful about for 3 years, the specific feeling of wanting to stay somewhere, loosen itself from the tightly bound place where he kept it and spread out slow and warm through his chest like the first coffee of a cold morning. He did not say anything else that evening. But when she stood to go inside, he found himself noticing exactly how the door frame looked with her standing in it, and thinking that he would like to see that particular picture for a great many more evenings. The next week, Wade Prout came. Isaac was working on the north fence when he heard the horses, 2 of them, and he straightened and watched a pair of riders come down the valley road. He recognized Wade Prout from Alberta's description, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s, with the look of someone who had gotten his way often enough to find it irritating when he did not. The man with him was a hired hand named Coulter, who Alberta had mentioned as someone Wade used for errands he preferred not to claim. Alberta came out of the house when she heard them. She stood in the yard with her arms loose at her sides and her chin level, and Isaac came to stand about 20 yards behind and to the left of her, which was close enough to be present and far enough to make clear he was not speaking for her. Miss Blackwell, Wade Prout said from the saddle. He had a way of saying her name as if it were a minor inconvenience. I see you have hired yourself help. I have, she said. Is there something you needed, Wade? I am going to be direct with you, he said, which Isaac already knew meant he was going to be indirect. My father has been reconsidering the eastern boundary on your parcel. There was an error in the original survey. There was no error in the original survey, Alberta said. There has been a more recent survey, however, conducted by Mr. Fletcher here, which found that several of my boundary markers had been moved. I have a witnessed and documented record of those findings, and I intend to present it to Judge Whittaker when he comes through in August. Wade Prout's eyes moved to Isaac, and the look between them was the brief, clear look of 2 men who understand each other perfectly and disagree entirely. Mr. Fletcher, he said. Mr. Prout, Isaac said, you are working for this woman. I am working with Miss Blackwell, yes. And you thought it was your place to conduct a survey on her behalf. I thought it was a reasonable use of my expertise, Isaac said mildly, given that someone was moving her fence posts. The color in Wade Prout's face shifted upward. That is a serious accusation. The documentation will make it more serious, Isaac said. In a good way if you are the one making the accusation. In a less good way if you are the one the documentation is about. There was a silence in which Wade Prout assessed his position and found it had changed. The quiet competence in Isaac's voice was the voice of someone who had already thought 3 steps ahead and was comfortable waiting to be caught up too. We will see what the judge makes of it, Wade said finally. He looked at Alberta. I would advise you to think carefully about whether you want to make an enemy of the Prout family, Miss Blackwell. I would advise you, Alberta said, with a quietness that was somehow more forceful than anger, to think carefully about whether your family wants to be the kind of family that is remembered for trying to take water rights from a woman who earned her land fairly. Wade Prout turned his horse and rode away, and Coulter followed, and the dust settled back down, and the valley was quiet again. Alberta let out a long, slow breath that she had been holding in a controlled way that only Isaac noticed. Are you all right? He asked. Yes, she said. Then after a moment, that was well said, what you said. You did better, he said. I will remember that line about how a family wants to be remembered. That was the effective one. She looked at him with surprise, because it was a specific kind of compliment, not a general reassurance but a recognition of a particular competence, and she had not gotten many of those in her life, not from people whose opinions she respected. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was softer than usual when she said it. June came in warm and steady, and the wheat in the east field came up in green rows that Alberta would walk between in the early morning, touching the tops with her fingers as if confirming that they were real. Isaac watched her do this from the barn doorway one morning and felt the specific ache of someone watching a person they care about be completely themselves in their natural place, and knew with the clarity that certain things arrive with that he was in considerable trouble in the best possible way. He had not told her. He was not sure of the right way to do it, and he was more afraid of doing it wrong than of most things he had faced, which was itself informative. Cecilia Reyes appeared to notice, because Cecilia was the kind of person who noticed everything while appearing to be entirely occupied with something else. She came by on a Thursday afternoon when Isaac was repairing the plow and Alberta was inside, and she stopped her horse near him and looked down with the expression of a woman who has decided to stop pretending something is not obvious. "You are going to tell her or I am going to lose patience," Cecilia said cheerfully. Isaac looked up from the plow. "I do not know what you are referring to." "You watch her the way my husband Marcos watches the mountains when he thinks I am not looking," Cecilia said. "Like something he cannot believe he gets to see every day and is grateful for." Isaac was quiet for a moment. "She has a great deal on her mind right now. The judge, the boundary dispute, the summer harvest. People always have a great deal on their minds," Cecilia said. "That is not a reason. That is an excuse." She gave him the level look that appeared to be standard equipment for women in this valley. "She is not good at letting people care for her. She had to learn not to need it. But that does not mean she does not want it." She rode on toward the house to find Alberta, and Isaac went back to the plow and thought for a long time about the difference between what a person learned not to need and what a person wanted. It was a Sunday in late June when something changed, the way things change between people, not suddenly, but at the moment you finally notice what has already been true for some time. They had ridden out together to check the western fence line, where the creek crossed the property boundary, and they had tethered the horses at the cottonwoods and walked the last stretch along the water, which ran in bright cold channels over rounded red stones. Alberta had crouched to check the depth of the channel, which had been running higher with the spring snowmelt from the mountains, and when she stood back up, she was closer to him than she had intended, and neither of them stepped back. "The channel will need the second berm reinforced before July," she said, though she was looking at his face rather than the channel. "Yes," he said, "we should do it soon." "Yes." She was still not looking at the channel, and neither was he, and the creek ran its steady cold music between the red stones, and the cottonwoods moved in their young-leafed way overhead, and the entire Cimarron Valley was very quiet and very golden and very present. "Alberta," he said. "I know," she said, before he could go further. "What do you know?" "I know what you are going to say, and I have been thinking about whether I ought to let you say it. And—" She looked up at him with the directness that was her most fundamental quality, the complete absence of pretense that had been the first thing he had genuinely noticed about her, back on the road with the broken wheel. "I have not let anyone close to me in a long time," she said. "Not since my father died, and I understood what it meant to be alone with this piece of land and this future. I built everything careful and deliberate, and I did not leave room for complications." "I am not trying to complicate anything," he said. "I know that too," she said. "That is the problem. If you were trying to complicate things, I would know how to handle it." He understood that. He looked at the creek and then at her, and felt the specific courage it takes to be honest about something that matters. "I came here by accident," he said. "I turned south at a fork for no particular reason, and I found you with a broken wheel, and I have been looking for a reason to stay every morning since. That is not something I know how to be casual about." She was quiet for a long moment. The creek talked between them, and somewhere a meadowlark did its cascading song from a fence post. "I would not want you to be casual about it," she said finally. He took her hand, which was work-hardened and warm, and she let him, and that was the beginning of it, or rather the recognition of what had already begun considerably earlier. He did not kiss her that afternoon by the creek, but he held her hand on the walk back to the horses, and she did not take it back, and they rode home in the long evening light with the kind of quiet between them that is not empty but full. She let him kiss her 3 days later on the porch after supper, when the June moon was coming up over the ridge and the valley was silver and dark below it, and it was a careful, unhurried kiss, the kind that has thought in it, that says I mean this and I know I mean it. She kissed him back with equal deliberateness, and when she pulled back she was looking at him in a way she had not looked at anything in a long time. "You are staying past August," she said. It was not entirely a question. "I expect so," he said. "You should know," she said, "that this land is mine. I will not trade or share the ownership of it, and I intend to work it and hold it for the rest of my life, and it will be the center of whatever life I have." "I would not have it any other way," he said, and he meant it in the uncomplicated way of a man who had spent 3 years without a center and recognized a good one when he saw it. July was the best month of Alberta's 3 years on the claim, and she was aware enough of that to mark it. The wheat was coming on strong, and the corn in the south garden had hit its tall green stride, and Isaac had finished the east field fence in a way that looked, to anyone who cared to look at it, like it had always been there and would be there for 100 years more. Cecilia and Marco's Rays came for supper twice, and the 4 of them sat on the porch after dark talking about the valley, and the market price of wheat, and the new family that had filed a claim up on the ridge, and whether the fall would be wet or dry, and Isaac fit into those evenings with the ease of a person who had always belonged in them. He was good with Marco's, who was a quiet and thoughtful man who had worked this country for 15 years, and had the steady, unhurried quality of someone who had made his peace with the land's indifference a long time ago. Marco's taught Isaac things about the valley's particular soil and weather patterns, and Isaac told Marco's about the survey techniques he had learned from Caleb Hurst, and there was a mutual respect between them of the straightforward kind that does not require much maintenance. One evening when Marco's had gone to check on a heifer that had been off her feed, Cecilia sat next to Alberta on the porch and said quietly, "I have never seen you look like that." "Like what?" Alberta said. "Like someone who has put something down that they have been carrying for a long time," Cecilia said. Alberta was quiet. She could see Isaac and Marco's down at the barn, 2 figures in the lamplit doorway, and she thought about 3 years of early mornings alone and late evenings alone, and every decision made alone, and she thought about the particular lightness of the last month, which was not the lightness of having fewer responsibilities but the lightness of having someone to be responsible with. "I am afraid of it," she admitted, which she had not said out loud before. "Of course you are," Cecilia said. "That is how you know it is real." In the second week of July, a man rode in from Dodge City looking for Isaac. His name was Talbot, a former cattle broker's associate, and he came with a story about a driving contract that the Dodge City yards were offering, 3 months of trail work moving a large herd south from the Dakotas, good wages. He stayed one night at Redemption Creek and sent word to the homestead through the general store, and Isaac rode to town to hear it. Alberta did not say anything when he told her about it that evening. She made coffee and sat at the table and listened to the whole of it with her hands folded in the careful way she had when she was controlling her expression. "What will you do?" she asked when he had finished. "I am not going to take it," he said. She looked up. "Why not?" "Because I am not a trail hand anymore," he said. "I have not been for some time, I just did not admit it. The wages would have been good." "Alberta," he said, "I am not going to leave this valley for 3 months of trail work. I am going to stay here and help you prepare for the harvest and face the circuit judge in August, and after that I am going to ask you something important if that is acceptable." She looked at him with the wide, clear gaze of someone who understands exactly what is being said. "What are you going to ask me?" "I am going to ask you to marry me," he said. "After August, when the boundary dispute is resolved and everything is settled. Because I want to ask you when there is nothing pressing at your edges, so you can answer just for yourself, and not for the land or the legal situation or anything other than whether you want to." She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he felt the specific suspension of waiting, which is one of the most honest feelings there is. "That is a very particular kind of consideration," she said finally. "I have had time to think about how to do this right." "Isaac," she said, and the way she said his name was different from how she had been saying it, warmer with something open in it. "I already know my answer. I have known it for several weeks. But I will wait until August if you would like, since you have arranged it that way." He laughed, which was a sound that surprised them both because it was so uncomplicated and delighted, and she smiled in the way she had been learning not to stop herself from doing, and the June moon had moved on to July, and the valley was turning its golden summer color outside the window. Circuit Judge Cornelius Whitaker came through Redemption Creek on the 14th of August, with the brisk, world-weary efficiency of a man who had seen every kind of human dispute the frontier could produce, and still believed in the usefulness of written law. He held his court in the Redemption Creek Town Hall, which was also the school on weekdays and the church on Sundays, an arrangement that seemed philosophically appropriate to Alberta. She came to court with the deed, the original plat, the survey documentation in Isaac's precise hand, Cecilia Reyes's witness signature, and the field notes with measurements and photographs of the moved fence posts that Isaac had taken using a borrowed photographic plate camera from Anders Lindqvist's brother-in-law, who had come through town in June with the apparatus. The photographs were grainy and imperfect, but they were clear enough on the post positions. Wade Prout came with his father Harlan, who had the uncomfortable look of a man who had been told his son had created a legal problem and was not happy about it, and a lawyer from the county seat named Morrison who specialized in land disputes. Morrison was good but not exceptional. Judge Whitaker looked at everything for 20 minutes in silence while the town hall filled with quiet people who had come to see how it came out. Because, in a small valley community, a boundary dispute is a matter that affects everyone's sense of what kind of place they are living in. Isaac testified calmly and technically, laying out the survey methodology and findings with the clarity of someone who understood both the subject and the importance of being precise in front of a judge. He had the surveyor's manual open to the relevant passages and cross-referenced his own notes with the original plat in a way that Judge Whitaker visibly appreciated. Cecilia testified as to the witness signatures. Alberta spoke last, briefly and directly, presenting the deed and the history of the claim without drama or appeal to sympathy, only facts. Morrison tried to argue measurement error. Judge Whitaker asked him, with the mild patience of a man who had heard this particular argument before, to explain how measurement error produced a systematic pattern of displacement in only one direction, toward the water source, across 5 separate posts. Morrison did not have a satisfying answer. Judge Whitaker ruled in Alberta Blackwell's favor on all points, ordered the fence posts restored to their documented original positions within 30 days, and noted in his written findings that the pattern of displacement suggested deliberate interference with a legally established boundary, which he was recording formally in the county record in case of future incidents. Harlan Prout looked at his son for a long moment with the expression of a man who has paid a significant price for someone else's decision and intends to discuss it at length in private. Wade Prout stared at the table in front of him with the tight expression of someone who had gambled and lost and was not yet ready to accept it. Outside the town hall, Cecilia grabbed Alberta by both arms and said something in rapid Spanish that was clearly celebratory. Marcos shook Isaac's hand with the firm grip of real approval. Isaac stood in the afternoon sunlight outside the Redemption Creek Town Hall and watched Alberta talking to Cecilia, and thought that he had rarely felt as specifically useful in the world as he did at that moment, which was a fine feeling, and one he intended to hold on to. He waited until that evening, when they were back at the homestead, and the supper things were cleared, and the lamp was lit on the table, and the valley was settling into its warm August dusk. He had been carrying what he needed to carry for 3 weeks in his breast pocket, and now he took it out and set it on the table between them. It was a ring, a simple band of silver with a small turquoise stone set in it, which he had bought from a Navajo silversmith named Pedro Benali, who had a trading arrangement with the Redemption Creek General Store. The turquoise was the exact color of the Cimarron sky in October. "August," he said. "Everything settled. No pressing matters at your edges, just you and the question." Alberta looked at the ring for a moment and then at him with the full, open look that was the most private version of her face, the one she did not show to most people. "Ask me properly," she said. He stood up and came around the table and took her hand in both of his and looked at her in the lamplight with the complete honesty of someone who has decided to put everything they have into one place. "Alberta Blackwell," he said, "I rode into this valley by accident on the same morning you finished 3 years of work and earned everything you have in it, and I do not call that coincidence anymore. I call it the best piece of luck I have ever had. I love you. I want to stay in this valley and work this land beside you and build a life here that is as solid and real as the work you have already put into it. Will you marry me?" She was quiet for exactly one breath. Then she said, "Yes." "Isaac Fletcher, yes." He put the ring on her hand, and she looked at it with the expression of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting without quite realizing they had stopped. And then she stood and put both her hands against his face and kissed him in a way that was different from all the previous kisses, with a fullness and an openness that meant she had finally put down the last of the careful protective distance she had been carrying. And the lamp burned steady on the table, and the valley was dark and full of stars outside the window. They told Cecilia and Marcos the following Sunday, and Cecilia made a sound of such pure satisfaction that Alberta laughed out loud in her kitchen. Marcos shook Isaac's hand for the second time in a week and said, with the particular economy of a man who said what he meant and nothing else, "Good. This is right." They married in October when the Cimarron Valley had gone to its full autumn gold, and the wheat had been harvested, and the winter stores were laid in, and everything was as settled as the country allowed things to be. The ceremony was held in the church that was also the school and the town hall, performed by a Methodist minister named Reverend Sayers, who had a circuit that included Redemption Creek every second month. Cecilia stood with Alberta in the simple cream-colored dress that Alberta had made herself from fabric she had been saving since June, without ever quite admitting to herself why. Marcos stood with Isaac in a dark jacket that was slightly too short in the sleeve but was worn with complete dignity. The church had about 40 people in it, the full attending population of the valley community, people Alberta had worked alongside for 3 years, and people Isaac had met in the months since April, and looking out at them from the front of the church, Alberta felt the specific completeness of a moment that is exactly what it ought to be. She and Isaac stood facing each other in front of Reverend Sayers, and said the words with the particular weight of people who had thought about them carefully, and meant each one. When Isaac took her hand, it was warm and steady, the hand of a man who had decided where he was and intended to stay there. And when she looked at his face, she saw the same thing she had seen by the creek in June, the clear, quiet certainty of someone who was not afraid of this. They rode home to the homestead in the late afternoon of their wedding day, with the valley going amber and rose around them and the creek bright in its cottonwoods. And Alberta looked at the adobe house and the barn and the east field and the south garden, and felt the particular wholeness of knowing that everything she had built was exactly as she had built it, and she had not given up any of it, and she had gained, unexpectedly and irreversibly, something more. Isaac made supper that evening because he had insisted on it. He was not an elaborate cook, but he was a competent one, and he made a roast with the garden carrots and potatoes, and Alberta sat at the table where she had eaten alone for 3 years and watched him work at her stove, and thought that the landscape of the familiar could change entirely without the familiar becoming less itself. "You are looking at me," he said, not turning around from the stove. "I am allowed," she said. He smiled at the stove top, and she could see it in the set of his shoulders. Winter came in early November with the decisive intention of the Cimarron Valley's particular climate, which did not negotiate. Isaac had finished the second barn by then, a larger structure that could shelter the expanded stock Alberta planned for spring, using timber from the ridge and the carpentry techniques he had been refining since June. The adobe house had new chinking in all the exterior walls and a proper storm shutter on the north window, and a new cast-iron stove in the bedroom that kept the cold manageable. They spent the winter months in the close warmth of the house, working on the things that could be done inside, mending gear and keeping accounts and reading in the evenings by the lamp. Isaac had acquired several books from a traveling book peddler who had come through Redemption Creek in October, including a proper surveying manual, a volume on irrigation engineering, and a novel by a woman named George Eliot that Alberta had requested and read in the first 2 weeks, with the focused hunger of someone who had gone a long time without new reading material. On winter evenings, Isaac sometimes talked about Tennessee, carefully, in small portions, the way you take apart something complicated. Alberta listened without interrupting and asked questions that were precisely the right size, not too large and not too small, and he found that talking about it in this way, in small, careful portions to someone who listened well, made it lighter without making it smaller. She told him about her father, the way he had been before the war years got into him, a man who had loved the country with a literary kind of passion that she had inherited, which was part of why she had come to this particular valley when the letter arrived pointing to it. She thought he would have liked Isaac Fletcher, her father. She thought they would have sat on the porch and argued about farming methods and agreed about the mountains. In February, Alberta told Isaac she was expecting a child. She told him in the morning, before either of them had fully shaken off sleep, because she had been keeping the knowledge to herself for 2 weeks and had decided that keeping it any longer was a kind of dishonesty. He was very still for a moment when she told him. Then he reached for her hand under the quilt and held it with the same careful steadiness with which he did everything that mattered. "When?" he asked. "September, I think," she said. "Maybe late August. We will need to get a doctor established," he said. "I know there is no one in Redemption Creek, but the barber does some work and there is a real physician in the county seat. Cecilia has delivered half the babies in this valley," Alberta said. "She has more experience than most doctors." "Cecilia and the county physician both," he said. She looked at him in the morning light. "You are not frightened." "I am quite frightened," he said honestly. "But I am also more happy than I know what to do with, which is the dominant feeling at the moment." She brought his hand to her cheek and held it there. "Good," she said. "That is the right order of it." Spring came again, and with it, the second planting season on Alberta's claim, which was also now Isaac's claim, though the deed remained in her name as she had specified, and as he had never questioned. They put in double the wheat of the previous year, and extended the south garden to include a proper kitchen herb section that Alberta had been planning since the first summer. Isaac broke the north field that had been lying fallow since the claim was filed, and the soil there was the best on the property, dark and deep, and holding moisture well, and they planted it with a mixed crop that Marcos Reyes recommended based on what had done best in the valley over the previous decade. Harlan Prout retired from the land office in March, and his replacement was a young man from Topeka named Collins who was methodical and fair, and had apparently received a significant briefing about the events of the previous August, because he treated Alberta with the careful respect of someone who understood the legal record clearly. Wade Prout had sold his family's remaining valley parcel in January and moved to the county seat, And if this was a direct consequence of the August judgment, it was not something anyone in Redemption Creek said out loud, though the valley's general atmosphere improved measurably. In May, a letter came from the county surveyor's office in the county seat. They were looking for a contracted surveyor to help with a major land mapping project, the formal documentation of the entire Cimarron Valley parcel network in preparation for the territory's eventual statehood application. The work would span 18 months and could be done from a home base in the valley. The pay was substantial. Isaac read the letter twice and then handed it to Alberta. She read it and looked at him. "How did they find you?" she asked. "I believe Judge Whitaker mentioned my survey work in his report," Isaac said. "He filed it with the county office." Alberta looked at the letter again, at the number they were offering for the work, and thought about what 18 months of that income would mean for the homestead, for the barn expansion, for the equipment she had been making do without. "You should take it," she said. "I can do the work from here," he said. "The mapping involves writing the valley boundaries and documenting the parcels. I will be home every night." "I know," she said. "I am not worried about that. I am saying you should take it because it is good work, and you are the right person for it, and because this valley will be better documented for it." He looked at her with that expression she had come to think of as the one that meant he was aware of how fortunate he was and was not taking it for granted. "I will send the reply today," he said. He rode to Redemption Creek and sent the acceptance and came back with a bolt of blue fabric that Alberta had mentioned once, in passing, in February, and she looked at the fabric and then at him. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember most of what you say," he said. She stood in the kitchen doorway with the blue fabric in her arms and thought that this was love in its daily and actual form, not the grand gesture but the small precision of being known. The summer was full. Isaac rode the valley on the surveying contract 5 days a week and returned every evening, and the breadth of his work took him across the full sweep of the Cimarron territory, through the properties of the various settlers and the grazing lands and the creek corridors and the edges where the valley met the ridgeline country. He kept his notebook carefully and his measurements precisely and built relationships with every landholder in the valley, because the survey work required their cooperation, and because Isaac Fletcher was the kind of man who understood that relationships were the infrastructure of a community. He met, in the course of this work, a range of people as varied as the valley itself. There was old Thomas Beauchamp, who had come from Georgia after the war and built a cattle operation on the valley's north end that ran 300 head, a man of considerable gruffness and unexpected kindness, who fed Isaac lunch every Friday on principle. There was the Nakamura family, Japanese immigrants who had filed a claim on the Eastern Ridge in 1875 and raised the best vegetables in the territory, and who invited Isaac to supper twice with a formality and warmth that he found deeply genuine. There was a young black homesteader named James Corbett who had filed on a creek parcel the previous year, who was 22 years old and managing his claim alone with tremendous determination, and who Isaac quietly helped survey his property lines in his own time, understanding what it meant to be a black man alone trying to hold a legal land claim in the territory in 1879. And what kind of documentation could provide protection against the specific kind of opposition James Corbett was likely to face. Alberta went with Isaac sometimes on the survey rides, when Cecilia could look in on the homestead, and the valley seen from a horse in summer was the same country she had walked for 3 years but seen differently, with the breadth of it available rather than the focus of it. And she thought about what the surveying manual called a bird's-eye view, the ability to see the relationships between things from above and outside, and she thought that love had something like that quality when it was working properly. The ability to see yourself from slightly outside yourself, with the perspective that another person's genuine seeing of you provided. Their son was born on the 2nd of September, 1879, in the adobe house in the Cimarron Valley with Cecilia and the county physician both present, as Isaac had insisted on from February. He was a healthy and emphatic boy who made his feelings about the outside world known immediately and at considerable volume. They named him Daniel, after Alberta's father. Isaac held him on the evening of his birth while Alberta rested, sitting by the bedroom window with the boy in his arms looking out at the valley, which was going into its second fall gold, and the feeling he had looking out at the valley, and then down at the sleeping face in his arms, was the feeling of a man who had been looking for a place to stay and had found, instead of a place, the very different and better thing of a life that was genuinely his. Alberta watched him from the bed with the specific soft attention of someone who has just done the most considerable thing they have ever done, and is now watching someone they love doing something that moves them completely. "He looks like you," she said. "He looks like a very small person who has recently been inconvenienced," Isaac said. She laughed quietly, and he looked at her across the room with the full, clear look of someone who loves well and knows it. The winter of 1879 and 1880 was the best winter of Alberta's life, which was saying something for a woman who had built her life around a piece of land in a valley where winters could be genuinely difficult. Daniel was healthy and growing, and had the determined, focused quality that both of his parents recognized as familiar. Isaac's surveying contract extended through the following year, when the county expanded the mapping project to include the Ridge territories, and the income had allowed them to build a proper addition to the house, 2 new rooms on the east side, with real timber floors and glass windows that Alberta had chosen herself from the supply catalog at the general store, with the careful attention of someone who had been looking at a single window for 3 years. The homestead had grown into something that was genuinely beautiful, Alberta thought, in the way that practical things built with care become beautiful. The large garden enclosed now in a proper fence with a gate, the 2 barns standing solid against the hillside, the wheat field and the north field both producing, the irrigation channel running clean and well-engineered along the western edge. She stood in her garden in the early spring of 1880 with Daniel on her hip, 18 months old and extremely interested in the nature of seeds and soil, and looked at the house with its new rooms and its glass windows, and thought about the woman who had come here 3 years ago with a letter from a dead father and a stubbornness that had turned out to be the most valuable thing she owned. She had kept everything she had built. She had not given an inch of it, not to Wade Prute's fence posts, not to the county sheriff's indifference, not to the 3 winters that had tried to convince her the land was not worth the cost. And she had added to it, not by giving up any of the self that had built it, but by finding someone who built alongside her rather than trying to build over her, and that was the thing she had not known was possible until it happened. Isaac came in from the survey ride at the end of a March afternoon to find her in the garden with Daniel, and he stopped at the gate and looked at the 2 of them in the low, warm light with the expression that Cecilia had once compared to Marco's looking at the mountains, and Alberta saw it and smiled. "How was the Ridge country?" she asked. "Cold and beautiful," he said. The Nakamura family extended their fence line 6 feet into the public grazing land on the north side. I told them, and they were mortified and fixed it immediately. "How is Mrs. Nakamura? She sent you these." He produced from his coat a packet of seeds, carefully wrapped in paper and labeled in both Japanese and English, heirloom vegetable seeds that Mrs. Nakamura maintained with the attention of a museum curator. Alberta took them with delight and looked at the labels with the focused pleasure of someone planning next year's garden. Daniel reached for the packet with the conviction of a child who believes all interesting objects are his by right. "Not for eating," Alberta told him. Daniel looked at her with the expression of someone who disagrees philosophically, but is reserving the argument for a better moment. Isaac came through the garden gate and stood beside her, and she leaned against him with the unconscious ease of someone for whom another person's presence has become the most natural thing in the world. And he put his arm around her, and looked at the house and the land with the settled, grateful look of someone who knows exactly where he is, and has chosen it completely. In the spring of 1881, James Corbett's claim on the creek parcel came under legal challenge from a speculator out of the county seat, who had been buying up contested claims and reselling them to Eastern investors. Isaac spent 3 weeks of his own time building a complete survey and documentation record for James's parcel and rode to the county seat to present it personally alongside James at the county land board hearing. The speculator's lawyer was better than Morrison had been, but the documentation was thorough enough that the board ruled in James Corbett's favor, and the speculator left the territory in the kind of mood that produces excellent cautionary tales. James Corbett came to the homestead the Sunday after the ruling, and Alberta made supper for 4, and they sat on the expanded porch that Isaac had built the previous fall and watched the valley in the evening light. And James talked about his plans for the creek parcel with the particular combination of ambition and realism of a young man who has learned not to take any of it for granted. "I owe you considerably," James said to Isaac. "You owe me a good neighbor," Isaac said. "That is all." James was quiet for a moment. This valley would be a different place without people willing to say that. "It is the same valley everywhere," Alberta said. "People just choose what kind of place to make it." In the fall of 1881, Alberta discovered she was expecting again. She told Isaac in the morning again before full waking, which had become their private tradition for telling each other important things, as if the unguarded early morning was the truest version of each other. He held her hand under the quilt and said, "September again." "June, I think," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "We will need to expand the children's room." "I know," she said, "and we need to order the proper glass for the north window before winter." "I love you," he said. "I know that too," she said, but she said it warmly, with the particular softness she kept for him, and turned to look at him in the morning light that came through the glass window she had chosen herself. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born on the 4th of June, 1882, with considerably more impatience than her brother had shown, arriving fast enough that Cecilia barely had time to get there, and the county physician did not make it at all. Rose was fierce and certain from the first hour, which both her parents noted with the resigned recognition of people who can identify their own qualities when reflected in a small face. Daniel, who was 2.5 and had strong opinions about most things, took one look at his sister and said, with the solemnity of someone rendering a fair judgment, "Small." Alberta and Isaac both laughed until they had to hold each other up. The surveying contract with the county concluded in 1882 with the delivery of a comprehensive mapped record of the entire Cimarron Valley territory that was cited by the Territorial Office as the most thorough land documentation project in the region. The county surveyor sent a formal letter of commendation and asked if Isaac would consider a permanent staff position. Isaac read the letter at the kitchen table and thought for a moment, and then put it aside and went out to walk the east field, which was in its late summer color, the wheat tall and golden, and moving in the Cimarron wind that came off the ridge in the afternoons. He walked to the eastern boundary where his iron stakes stood in their proper positions with their paint marks still clear after 4 years, and he stood there and looked at the land and thought about the word permanent in the county's letter, and about what permanent actually meant. He walked back and picked up the letter again and read the county's offer, which was reasonable, and then put it down and went to find Alberta, who was in the garden with Rose on a blanket beside her, and Daniel, now almost 3, carefully and destructively investigating the bean plants. "The county has offered me a staff position," he said. She looked up from the garden. "What kind?" "Permanent, based at the county seat, surveying and land records." She looked at him with the measuring directness that had never changed from the first day on the road with the broken wheel. "What do you want to do?" "I want to decline," he said. "I want to do contracted work as I have been. It keeps me in the valley. It will pay less than staff work. We have the farm income," he said, "and the east field is doing better than last year, and I would rather be here." She held his gaze. "Are you certain that is what you want, not what you think I want?" "Alberta," he said, "I have known what I want since April of 1878. It is this valley and this land and this life and you. The county seat has nothing that competes with any of it." She stood up from the garden, brushing the soil from her hands, and walked to him and put her hands on his chest and looked up at him in the afternoon light. "Then write them a polite decline," she said, "and come help me with the south fence." He put his arms around her in the middle of the garden, with Rose watching with the serene interest of a baby taking notes, and Daniel sitting in the beans looking guilty about the beans. And Alberta let herself be held in the open air of her own land, with her own mountains behind her and the creek running in the cottonwoods to the west, and thought that this was the precise shape of everything she had wanted when she had not known she wanted it. By the fall of 1883, the homestead was one of the most established farms in the Cimarron Valley, with a working wheat operation, a productive kitchen farm, and a small cattle herd that Isaac had built up carefully over 2 years. The house had been expanded twice, and was now a solid, handsome building that sat well in the valley landscape, practical and permanent. Alberta kept the accounts in her own firm hand, and could tell you the profit on any field or season to the dollar, and Isaac managed the surveying contracts that came his way with the steady professionalism of someone who had made it their actual trade. Daniel Fletcher was 4, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's focused intensity, and followed Isaac around the farm with the dedicated apprenticeship of a child who has decided his father is the most interesting person he has ever met. Rose was 18 months and had opinions about everything, and was learning words at a pace that Alberta found both wonderful and somewhat alarming. Cecilia and Marcos Reyes remained their closest neighbors and truest friends, and the 4 of them marked the years of the valley together with the rituals of harvest suppers and spring plantings, and the particular anniversaries that matter to people who have shared real work and real stakes. When Marcos broke his leg in a cattle accident in the fall of 1883, Isaac ran the Reyes cattle operation alongside his own for 6 weeks while Marcos healed. And when Alberta had a bad fever in the spring of 1882 that kept her down for 10 days, Cecilia moved in and ran Alberta's kitchen and kept the children, and did it all with the matter-of-fact love of someone for whom that is simply what love means. James Corbett married a woman from the county seat named Harriet in 1883, a former schoolteacher who had been teaching at the county school and had ideas about opening a proper school in Redemption Creek. Alberta threw herself into supporting this project with the energy she brought to things that mattered, and by the fall of 1883 Harriet Corbett was teaching a class of 14 children in the town hall 3 days a week, and had applied for permanent school funding from the territory. Daniel Fletcher was among the 14, and came home every school day full of information about the world that he delivered to his parents at supper with the authority of a recent expert. In the spring of 1884, Alberta sat at the kitchen table early one morning before the house was awake, with her account books in front of her and the land deed, and the original plat and the survey documentation, and all the other papers she had kept in a wooden box since 1878, and she went through them with the focused attention she gave to accounts. She had been doing something like this once a year, a private reckoning, since before Isaac came. It had started as a way of measuring how far she had come and whether she was on track, in those early years when on track had been the most she could hope for. But this morning she sat with the papers spread out, and she did not measure progress. She simply looked at what was there. 160 acres in the Cimarron Valley, properly documented and defended and producing. A house that was built to last. 2 children sleeping in the room down the hall. A husband who was, at this moment, in the barn starting the morning chores because he had noticed 3 days ago that she was tired, and had taken the early chores without saying anything about it, which was exactly the kind of thing he did. She thought about the woman who had walked out of Harlan Pruitt's land office 6 years ago with the deed against her chest like a shield, stopping on the sidewalk, because a stranger on a gray horse had ridden into the valley, and something in the way the dust rose around his boots had made her stop moving for the first time in 3 years. She had not called it anything then. She had not known what to call it. She had called it coincidence, and then she had called it useful, and then she had called it complicated. And finally she had stopped finding names for it and had just let it be what it was, which was the best thing that had ever happened to her, arriving on the same morning as the last piece of paper that made her land completely and finally hers. The door opened and Isaac came in from the early morning, his coat carrying the cold of the April air, and he looked at her sitting at the table in the lamplight with her papers in front of her, and he stopped in the doorway with the expression she knew as his version of checking that she was all right. "Early for accounts," he said. "I was not doing accounts," she said. "I was thinking. About—" She looked at the papers and then at him, standing in the doorway of the house they had built together on the land she had fought for and kept and would keep. "About how I was standing in front of the land office 6 years ago today," she said, "and a man I had never seen came riding into the valley. He came in and closed the door against the April cold and stood looking at her across the table with the quiet, complete attention he had always given her. And I told myself I had no time for complications," she said. "You did say that. I was wrong about that specific thing," she said. He smiled, the real smile, the one he had learned from her to stop hiding. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and reached across the table and took her hand the way he had taken it 6 years ago by the Cimarron River, and she looked at their joined hands on the table between the account books and the old papers and the new plans for the Northfield expansion, and thought that this was what it meant to be in the right place, not the absence of difficulty or the end of work, but the presence of someone who made the difficulty and the work into a life you recognized as yours. 6 years, he said. 6 years, she agreed. Outside, the Cimarron Valley was coming into its April light, the cottonwoods leafing out for the 6th time since she had filed her claim, the creek running bright with snowmelt, the east field showing the first green of the new planting, and somewhere in the barn their gray horse, the same animal Isaac had ridden into the valley on the morning this story really began, was starting his day with the unhurried patience of an animal that had found its permanent home. Daniel appeared in the hall doorway in his nightshirt, his dark eyes serious with the early morning seriousness of a child who has been awake for longer than the adults know. "Is it a school day?" he asked. "Tuesday," Alberta said. "Yes," he considered this. "Is there oatmeal?" "There will be," Isaac said, standing and moving to the stove with the ease of a man who knows exactly where everything is and is exactly where he is supposed to be. Rose called from the children's room in the imperious tone of someone who has been awake for a while and has opinions about breakfast timing. Daniel went to tell her it was coming. Isaac put the oatmeal on the stove and Alberta folded the deed back into its place in the wooden box and put the box on its shelf and went to help with breakfast. And the house filled up with the morning sounds of a family starting its day in the valley. And outside the April light kept coming, generous and unhurried, the same light that had come on the morning she walked out of the land office with the deed against her chest, and on the morning a stranger on a gray horse had ridden into the valley, and on all the mornings since, each one better than she had known to ask for and exactly as permanent as the red sandstone of the Cimarron Ridge that stood in the east window every day of her life, solid and certain and entirely, irrevocably hers.